moving on for it. But I'll let Dave talk about that. He's also going to talk about Keplerian elements, which are a very key point about all the things we're doing at the moment. Thank you.
Sorry, Chris, I just pulled your power leader.
Success, yeah.
Yes, there we go. Make sure I don't pull it off the table. First of all, congratulations to Chris on Strand. I know what it's like for doing software engineering. I know it was really up to the last minute, wasn't it? One of my apps was due to fly on the experiment. Things changed at the last minute, didn't they? So unfortunately she didn't get to fly, but the idea was that it could actually be uploaded later. Well, hopefully so. Sometime later in the year we might get the opportunity. But it was an app that ran on something not much bigger than that. This is something of a bit of information for those who don't know about Keplerian elements. It's a bit of an advert for an app that is being generated at the moment, another app, which you'll see probably halfway or part of it halfway through the talk. For those of you who don't know what Keplerian, I can never pronounce it properly. Keplerian. So basically, it's a set of elements that are produced by NORAD and the US agencies, which specify what the orbital characteristics are. Given in a well-known numerical form and consumed by a large number of pieces of software. And as the title says, there are lots like this. There are probably for every orbiting device, as Chris said, something like 30,000 and bits of junk as well. There will be 30,000 elements in the database. There are a large number of sources for this. One of the oldest ones is Celestrac. Tom Kelso, from the Centre for Space Standards and Innovation in the States, has been producing this for more years than I care to remember. It's going back at least into the mid-70s, probably early 70s, maybe even further back than that. The official organisation that produced them is part of the North American tracking organisation, and SpaceTrack. And of course our friends in North America, AMSAT.org and other organisations release the elements as I should say text files. There are a large number of categories of Keplerian elements. You can see there's quite a few. The ones we're interested predominantly are the amateur radio ones and the CubeSats. But for our friends in the Earth observation groups, the weather satellites are also of great interest. Categorization of these things is obviously difficult for the providing bodies because they don't know what we actually want. They don't know how we want to categorize them. Just checked on the on Tom Kelso's site. And there are something like 36 amateur satellites, 36 satellites characterized as amateur radio, and 55 characterized as CubeSats. Well, I know those numbers are wrong. Basically, there are a lot more amateur satellites, and maybe that's the right number of CubeSats, but it looks a bit high to me. We should. It's out. The problem is there's a lot of duplication in the categorization. A lot are non-operational as far as we're concerned, but as far as the tracking organisations are concerned, they're still out there. There's also a problem that it depends who is disseminating the information as to how often they look at the master SpaceTrack database before they actually disseminate it. Celestrac can be something like a week behind if Tom's automated systems haven't updated. Space track themselves, they're within a day, if not half a day, usually. Little advert. You may not be able to read it, but at the top of the app there it says AMSAT Droid Free, which is the thing that's going to be running on this phone. About 12 months ago, I was given the source code to an Android application which does tracking and prediction and Earth maps and everything else, which I spoke about last year. This is a typical, the original choice menu for the application. As you can see, there are a large number of satellites which are rest in peace to a large extent, but that list disappears down there somewhere to something like 40 satellites from the amateur text field. This is the sales pitch for the next version of the application. You'll be able to make a choice of what you want to track, but I'll tell you more about that in a second. This is a fundraising app for AMSAT itself. It's not for me. A large proportion of the funds the income we get from it will actually go to AMSAT, and in particular the AMSAT, the Satellite Building Fund. Because we're using an Android phone, I have to say that it's in the Google Play Store, and Google will take a cut of it as well, so we won't get as much as we hope we get out of it, but it'll be a reasonable amount. So that's typically what the sort of list looks like, and it's a real mixture of satellite IDs. As well as the Keplerian elements themselves, which define what the orbits are, it's also nice to know what the characteristics of individual satellites are. And our good friends in North America have a really good website. Unfortunately, it got hacked a little while ago, and all that information, even though it's in the database, is some of it's coming back slowly, but a lot of it is still hidden. Most of the amateur satellites, CubeSats, have their own website, to give us information about what frequencies they're using, and characteristics of the satellites themselves, what the experiments are. Graham and Mike and quite a few other people are involved in the IRU frequency coordination, and that is publicly available for the frequency allocations. There are individual aggregators of the information, and there are also sites which do operational logging. So there's lots and lots of sources on the internet for characteristics of particular satellites. Show you a few. This is DCAR, which basically a user can log in and say, I heard a particular satellite at a particular time. So if you want to see if something is alive, you just go to the website and say, yeah, it's on the list. I'm a bit dubious about AO51 now. This was taken literally about an hour ago, so I'm not quite sure about that. But the linear transponders, you can see, are really heavily used. AO7, FO29, and SO50 is very popular for FM. VO52, again, is a linear transponder, and HO68 putting its beacon out, and I'm sure we've got our friends in Delphi C3 also transmitting quite regularly. So there are lots of pieces of information. This is Mike's site, giving the characteristics of amateur satellites. If you drill down into each link, you'll find out more about it. So there are lots and lots of disparate pieces of information out there. The consumers for the information, we've talked about the Novas and Orbitrons and PCSat-32s. They're tracking programs. Carlos has been showing Mac Doppler Pro for most of the weekend, doing a practical demonstration of it. There are web applications that consume the elements. Lots of people have done homebrew projects, including me. we know that there are, including AMSAT Droid, there are something like 15 other applications running on Android and an iPhone and the Windows tablets as well. And there are there are projects which consume the Keplerian elements, things like Genso. I was fortunate the tracking algorithm within Genso was actually one of mine. So what I'd like to propose is a mixture of these two things, the Keplerian elements and the satellite information, to be consumed by a variety of users. It ideally is a central source of definitive information. Somebody at the end of the colloquium last year said, "Why don't we do a database?" Yes, neat idea. Why don't we do a database? And so we're 12 months on. That conversation hasn't happened, but a lot of thought's been done about it. Ideally, we want the system to be maintained by the satellite developers themselves, so they can create information about their satellites, update the information as it changes, end of life, news items about it. This is sort of scattered across the internet. I know a lot. There are some really good individuals who keep us updated with the information. The AMSAT bulletin boards are good as well. But a comment was made to me, or I read a comment that the CubeSat community will make a really good website, for the sale for the sale to radio amateurs. But once it's in orbit, it then becomes a trickle of information. It would be nice to have that information kept regularly updated in some central place. As well as the providers of the information, we all know that I've sort of demonstrated that there's a lot of noise in the database for the TLEs. It would be nice for people to have their own categorizations. I want to define what is an amateur satellite, and the ones that are actually alive, what CubeSats I'm interested in. For our friends in the Earth observation group, they want to be able to define what their weather satellites are. Are they alive? And they also want to choose what's delivered. It's either in a timely manner, on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis, or whatever, and how they want it delivered. It's perfectly possible to actually take the TLEs with a text editor and chop it about to actually get what you want. Another mechanism might be that instead of doing that, if we have an integrated system of some kind, they can log in, do all the tick boxes, do their categorization, email me that, or however it's delivered on a regular basis. The other alternative for applications and things like the web apps is to have a set of web services which will deliver it as an XML structure of some kind, or a lightweight JavaScript implementation. I have to say that some of that is already some of those thoughts are already in place. I was given an XML schema a few days ago, which, because of the colloquium, I haven't had a chance to review yet. But somebody's already had this thought to actually combine KEPs and characteristics. So I'm going to be following that up next week. I'm running ahead of time. So basically, the idea is a web application of some kind. I don't really care what language it's going to be in, but it has to be scalable. If it's going to be used in our community, but if it's seen to be worthwhile, other groups might start to use it. Probably, as I said, have a user interface of some kind for administrators, for publishers of information, and the final consumers. It's going to have web services for delivery of the XML and the JavaScript versions of the information. Ideally, it should have it will have open interfaces for read, so there'll be no security because this is in the public domain as defined by SpaceTrack and CelesteTrack. I'll tell you more about that in a second. We need secure interfaces for update for the administrators, for the providers of the information. I think this is my last slide. How can we do it? We need collaboration from within the community itself, from the IARU, who do the frequency coordination. Ideally, I want to make it an open source project so that we can have collaboration on the specification, collaboration on the implementation, and agile test-driven development. Sorry, Chris, it's not waterfall. That's where my background comes from, because it is, to some extent, an experiment as well in software engineering. There's a good opportunity to get students involved in something like this. It could become quite a complex system. Complex systems do need to be tested extremely well. We're doing a commercial piece of, we're doing an in-house development where I work at the moment. And it's sort of, at what point does it fail? It fails when the testing coverage is less than 97%. We have 97% test coverage. That's the sort of aim. That's the sort of thing we aim for. Ideally, it's got to be redundant. So, sort of put it out in the cloud somewhere. Computer resource is relatively cheap these days. What I'm sort of leading up to is something about the advert for the. I did say to a lot of people out there, I'd say something about the application. This is what is going to underlie the AMSAT Droid application. I'm going to start writing this. If anybody else wants to get involved, I'd be very, very happy for them to get in touch with me. I am going to open source the database. Sorry, the open source the application service. The other thing I can say is that about 3 weeks ago, I approached SpaceTrack to ask if I could be a supplier of TLEs. About 4 days ago, I got the reauthorization to actually do dissemination. Well ahead of time. Any questions?
Questions in house? Any online at all? Yeah, we have.
One from the web HB9 DRV. Satellite status in XML would be an excellent resource. TLEs can be obtained easily, but the actual status, not so. The RSGB's IOTA site is an excellent example of delivering data in XML. There are so many subsets which are being launched, it's very difficult to keep track. So it's not actually a question, more a comment supporting.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, like everybody else, I've been frustrated with it, for so many years, and the reason why I adopted this, I actually asked the previous owner of the app, and I made about 5 different suggestions, and it all went quiet, followed by an email about 3 months later saying, well, yeah, they're really good, all good ideas, do you want to do it? This is why it came my way. Chris, do you want to ask something?
Yeah, I had
Sorry, got something else?
a question about the permission that you got to distribute the. I'll move away from the speaker. About the distribution, is that a personal permission or is it an entity? How does that work? Are you personally liable, for instance, if there's something wrong, or how does that work?
At the moment, it's a personal permission to distribute. It is actually for the AMSAT. It's specifically for the AMSAT Droid application, which is in itself an AMSAT benefit. I don't see any reason why it couldn't be extended. They were actually very, very helpful in the application.
Thank you.
Chris, I think you had a question.
Yeah, one of the things I was going to say was we put our satellite statuses actually into XML for Strand, so we can talk about that. And secondly, cloud-based servers cost money.
Yes. Well, if you go to the Amazon cloud, yes.
Yeah. I've got a voucher for 200 quid from them for that if you want to borrow it.
I know. I've already been in conversation with some of our friends, shall we say, in this community, and not saying servers have been volunteered, but there is a possibility that servers may have been volunteered already.
Glad to hear it. Thanks.
Any more questions? No? Okay, well, thank you, sir, Dave, and we wish you lots of luck with your work and hope it doesn't bog you down so much. Thank you. Yeah.